Hello, thank you for joining me and welcome. My name is Lauren James. I am the Yoga and Fitness Program Coordinator at the McFetridge Sports Center. And today's video is a thorough Thursday where we will go over a pose very thoroughly, where we don't really have time to do that in a fast-paced vinyasa class. But the problem with that is that some of these poses that we do in vinyasa classes can be really challenging and students often have questions. And so we're going to very deeply break down a pose, a back bend wheel pose. So Urdhva Dhanurasana. So we'll talk about that pose, what goes on in that pose, and then also two modifications for it if you're ever in that class, in a class, and your teacher is suggesting that pose. Here, I'll give you two options of things you could do instead. So Urdhva Dhanurasana wheel pose is a very deep back bend that requires a lot of spaces in your body to be very warmed up, very strong, very open, and very ready for the pose. And so it doesn't work for every body. So first, know that, and second, know that not only does it not work for every body, but it doesn't work for every body every day. So this is a very good example of a pose for me personally that on some days I can practice it and some days I cannot. I just was not warmed up enough or whatever the case may be. And so if you follow my videos, I've got a vinyasa video that is all about back bends, and when I taught that practice, I could feel in my own body that wheel was just not a good option for me that day, so I didn't demonstrate it and I didn't do it myself, but I did encourage you to do it. So if you maybe have watched that video and you thought, well, I don't really know that pose, and I really wish she would have demonstrated, I will do that with you now. Okay, so spiel over, let's get into it. So whether you're watching or following along, that is entirely your choice. But in the traditional setup for bridge pose, in wheel pose, you set up like you're coming into bridge. So feet are about hip distance apart. Feet look like the number 11, so make sure the toes don't turn out. Oftentimes in this pose, the toes want to turn out and the knees want to go wide. That's not as supportive. So we want feet hip distance, toes forward. And oftentimes I hear teachers say, to bring your heels as far back as possible and that you should be able to touch your heels. I also used to cue that, but the more that I've learned, the more that I see that that's not really ideal. Because if you watch, if I do this now, when I lift up, my shins are sort of leaning away at a diagonal. It might be really subtle, but they're at a diagonal. We really want them to be a vertical line, knees and heels stacked, one on top of the other, not one leaning over the other. So you don't want to have your heels too far back, maybe about a fist or so distance between, if that's possible. Okay, so the one of the trickiest part of wheel pose is the upper body strengthening aspect, and so that's really tough. That's a tough thing to sort of work around right in this moment. One thing you can do is put your hands on blocks. I'm not going to do that just for this demonstration, but you could put your hands on blocks behind you. But there's a lot happening here that the wrists need to be really open to be able to be placed like this. Sorry, I feel like you can't hear me when I do this, but placing your hands with your fingertips pointing back towards your shoulders, back towards the rest of your body. So there's a lot of spaces here in the upper body that need to be very open to allow that, and then in that sort of awkward position, you need to be able to push. So there's really a lot going on in this pose again, so it might not be your pose today, and that's okay. Okay, but if you just want to watch for just a moment, it might not be super pretty, but I will try to guide you through what a traditional way to come into wheel Urdhva Dhanurasana would look like. So again, from sort of this bridge setup, feet flat, toes forward, feet and knees hip distance. If you're new to wheel, well, my blocks are over there, but if you're new to wheel, one good thing to do is to put something between your inner thighs so that your knees don't go wide, because they're gonna probably want to, okay? So from this bridge setup, you lift up, you come into a bridge. Oftentimes I encourage students to take a few moving bridges, really squeeze the glutes, lift and lower, start to really get that articulation of the spine, start to get into this back bend, because this is a back bend here. This is my spine in neutral. This is a back bend, and that's the shape we want to get into. Okay, let's do this. So from bridge, you come into bridge, you lift your hips first. That's often overlooked. So hips come up first, squeeze your glutes, push your heels into the floor. Lower back, glutes, hamstrings, all should be working hard. You bring your hands alongside your ears with your middle fingers pointing towards your shoulders. You keep your knees in at hip distance. You keep your elbows in at shoulder distance. Push your hands and feet down. Come to the top of your head, but you're still pushing your hands down. And then when you feel ready, push all the way down. And you should be looking back at your thumbs. So you're looking at the space between your thumbs. Now I'm not going to stay here very long, but the hope is that I sort of look like a rainbow shape. Now to come out, draw the chin to the chest, the back of the head comes down, and then lowering everything down. Maybe get the hair out of the way, come back down. Into constructive resting pose. This is the pose I like to take and encourage students to take. Knees together, feet wide. So the opposite of butterfly. We've got now knees together, feet wide. And you rest. Okay, so that is Urdhva Dhanurasana. That is one of the deepest back bends that we regularly practice in yoga. And not everyone regularly practices it, but it is not uncommon to find that pose in a vinyasa sequence. So again, one of the things to really remember in that pose is that knees stay hip distance, elbows stay shoulder distance, and maybe I didn't even have the correct form while we were in it or while I was in it, but oftentimes all of those things start to go wide, so make sure everything stays nice and tight in. Okay, so if that pose doesn't work for you, here are your two modifications. One is any version of bridge, so holding it, staying here, interlacing the fingers, tucking the shoulders, reaching the knuckles towards the feet, being in yoga mudra in the arms, and Setu Bandha Sarvangasana, bridge pose in the legs. This takes a lot of work. Arms aren't working nearly as much as they would in wheel, but legs are still working hard, glutes are still working hard, and you're still getting that back bend shape. It's much milder, but it's still present. So that's one option. Another option is moving bridges, lift and lower. Then you can control it a little bit more. Another is a supported bridge. Again, my blocks are off to the side. Apologies for that. But lifting your hips, sliding the block under you, and just resting your seat and your sacrum on the block to take a more restorative back bend. Or you can come onto your stomach. So bow and wheel are really variations of each other. One is just the downward version of the other is upward facing. So the shape is very similar. The amount of work you have to do is not necessarily the same. Bow takes a little bit less work, and I would argue is probably more comfortable in more people's shoulders. I'm going to come up to a seat for just a second, because in wheel, if you think about the action of what your shoulder was doing, it looked something like this, really. But what we're about to do in bow is this. So this is much easier than this with weight on it. So bow is an easier option if shoulders are your issue. It's also not as deep of a back bend and not as much work, but it is still all of those things. You're still going to feel something in your shoulders. You're still going to open and take the back bend, and you're still going to be working, but it's just not as much. So even though it's a little clunky, if the rest of the class is on their back and a teacher says you can come into wheel, and you decide, you know, I don't want to come into wheel, I want to come into bow, you absolutely can. A lot of those things again are sort of modifications. You're just going to have to flip onto your stomach, which might be a little clunky, but it's really important to always remember that you are your own best teacher. You know your body better than anyone, so if you're on your stomach and everyone's on their back, but you know you're doing what's best for you, that is most important. Okay, so bow, we often start with a few rounds of locust, lifting all the limbs, and then lowering down. Lift maybe just for a breath, maybe for 5 breaths, maybe for 10 breaths, and you'll start to feel the back side of your torso working hard. But if you're looking for more of that back bend, the palms will face each other in towards the thighs. You'll bend your knees, grab onto your feet, your ankles, your shins, and we want to try to keep the feet and the knees about hip distance. Just like wheel, they often want to go wide, so can you keep them a little narrower? Push your hips down, your belly button down, lift everything up. So again, you could just be here in locust, same idea, or bend the knees, and then here, One of the things that's really crucial in this pose, not only keeping everything a little bit narrower, hip distance, but kick the hands into the feet into the hands. I'm not just pulling, because this is not what the pose looks like. It's not just my arms doing a ton of work and my legs relaxing and getting a quad stretch. We really want the tops of the feet to push into the hands and the hands to pull back. So there's a lot of tension on both my upper body and my lower body. Everything's working hard, and then you lower and you can rest. You can stack your fists, stack your hands, rest your forehead, rest your cheek. You can have your legs extended, bend your knees, maybe let them sway. And then you give yourself some time, depending on how your body feels. Maybe 3 breaths, resting is enough. Sometimes for me, I feel like I need more, like 10. I will take 1 more. I'm gonna come up to a seat. So for any one of these back bends, usually we take them about 3 times, 2 to 3 times, depending on the back bend itself. Wheel, we usually have about 2 to 3 opportunities to take it. Usually a teacher will cue a bridge and then maybe 2 wheels or maybe 3 wheels. And you can always, again, swap out one of those poses for any other one. Again, wheel, that first one where you really look like a rainbow shape, that is the most challenging. So if your teacher is cueing wheel, you can always do something less. It's really the opposite is tough. If your teacher is only cueing bridge and you take a wheel, your shoulders might not have been prepped. The teacher might not have been prepping and working on opening your shoulders for that specific pose. And so you can always sort of scale it back. And so again, instead of taking wheel, Urdhva Dhanurasana, you can always take lots of variations of bridge, moving bridges, a static bridge, a supported bridge, or coming onto your stomach and taking Dhanurasana, bow pose. So thank you for joining me. My name is Lauren James. I am the Yoga and Fitness Program Coordinator at McFetridge, and this was, again, a thorough Thursday where we went over back bends quite thoroughly for a vinyasa-based practice, and I hope you learned a little something and stay healthy and safe, and I hope to see you soon. Thank you. Bye.